Hey there, everybody. My name is Josh Heath. I am the Chief Operations Officer of High Level Games. I'm doing these government shutdown live streams. I put that it was 10. This is actually government shutdown live stream 11. The last couple of these, I did um, some solo play of Star Trek Adventures, and I realized today the reason why I didn't get started on time or anywhere close to the time that I've sort of set for doing these live streams is I felt like I was getting off the topic of what I was trying to do with my live streams, right? My hope is that these live streams can help other designers design things. I thought maybe I would play a solo RPG and see if that would be one, engaging for the audience, and two, engaging for me, right? Something to dig my claws into and get something out of. And I will probably swing back and do some more of that actual play, live play of Star Trek Adventures. But I really wanted to turn back around and focused a little bit on game design, and maybe because I was thinking about doing something that was for me as well as for you and other people, that I would work on one of the games that I've had percolating in my mind for the last, we'll just say, couple of months, but I think it's been a little bit longer than that, that I really would like to proceed working on, right? And that's this game that I've had an idea of so background on me, because I think it would be helpful in understanding this game. I joined the military when I was 24. I turned 25 while I was in basic training, the last day of basic training. And I joined the military because I wanted to get out of the military. What does that mean, right? I joined the military because I wanted to go to school and I wanted to use the GI Bill as my way of doing that, right? So I joined up with an intentional goal, and I fulfilled that goal, and then I went to college afterward, right? And I wanted from the beginning to work in some sort of peace building field, right? I had an idea that I wanted to work at the UN. Ultimately, I decided that working at the UN itself was probably not in keeping with my goals, but I did end up getting a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution, and a large portion of that degree was focused on intercultural dialogue, right? I ran a couple of dialogue sessions, not just sessions, but long form dialogues over 7 to 10 weeks while I was in grad school. And then I've been working on this project called Reach Out Role Playing Games for the last, we'll just say, 9 years. It's been almost 10 years now that I've been working on Reach Out Role Playing Games. And the original idea was to get people playing role playing games as a form of dialogue, right? I've talked about this at a couple of different conferences. I have a large framework of a modality for how to do that, and I think it's a good idea, right? I think it's an idea that I believe really strongly in, but the biggest issue is getting it to pay the bills. Has been incredibly difficult, if not impossible, right? It hasn't been possible to make that happen. I've been working instead to kind of incorporate some of the elements of what I call Roar Pig or Reach Out Role Playing Games into the various games that I make. And I wanted to make an indie game that was very intentionally focused around dialogue, right? But I wanted it to be a little bit weird, a little bit fun, a little bit fantasy esque, right? But not necessarily restricted to fantasy elements. I want to create a game that focuses on people after a conflict, and these people don't have to be human, right? I'm using people in a very broad sense. After a conflict, coming together and having a dialogue session, right? So I'm incorporating some world building concepts into a game where then you will play out as these characters engaging in an intercultural dialogue. That's the intent of this game. So I have a couple of different names that I'm still kind of deciding on which one I want to go with. I've got Mediation over Melee or Mediation Instead of Melee. I feel like Mediation over Melee is a little bit stronger, right? It's a little bit shorter. It's a little bit more concise. Maybe it's a little bit more effective because it's those things. So I'm probably going to go with that, but I'm still kind of waffling on it, right? I've got 3 pages, about 900 words here of this game as it stands right now. And that's not a lot, right? That's just beginning, working out this concept so it could be playable. So you're seeing this in super early stages because why not, right? I'm talking about game design. Why don't I show you some of my game design process? That said, what I'm not going to show you is actually how I wrote this 823 words that we've got here on the screen. Not that I have any problems with the way that I have done so, but what is interesting about the way that I put this together is I wrote it as emails to myself, right? Instead of writing it as on a piece of paper, right, on a Word or anything like that. I wanted to put it on. I wanted to put it in my email because it was a good way of sitting down with my phone wherever it was and writing out some of the concepts. I've done this with multiple different games that I've worked on, and this is not the right thing that I wanted to do. I am causing myself problems. So I realized you cannot see the screen fully. So I'm going to try and adjust where Word is a little bit on the screen so that you can see what I've written a little bit better. For anyone who maybe is watching this or may watch this in the future with an interest in kind of what I'm doing with game design. Hopefully that's a little bit better. I've adjusted it. Well, you can't see it because you don't know what I'm doing in OBS. Okay, so I've adjusted it a little bit in OBS, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to see that screen. I think I've said it that way anyway. What I will try to do is I will talk about this game. Nope, I'm looking at, there we go. Thankfully, finally it's on there. And so what I did, right, was I sent these emails to myself. I was just writing out ideas. I started out with a little bit of a story here at the beginning. I referenced an old character of mine as an orc. I've used this character in a big bad villain that I created for the big bads by High Hit Point Press. Ooh, those H names, getting confused there. By Hit Point Press, I included Grondak as one of the NPCs in my big bad for one of the monsters that I created for them, which was awesome. I think it was Vero that I included that in. So Vero is an exalted owl bear, and Grondak was an orc that was one of the people worshiping that exalted owl bear. Fun thing, look up the big bad bundles, the big bads by Hit Point Press. I highly recommend 1 through 6. I wrote 2 of those. We won an Ennie. This is not bragging, just telling you about it. Anyway, so I used that character again. I referenced him here in this orcish king group that I wanted to use as representative, right? And then we've got these halflings who are acting as the peace talk. They're holding the peace talk, right, between these two groups, and not because they're really excited about it, but they are living in the area as well, and the orcs and the kobolds have been fighting one another, and so the halflings have been involved here and there, and now they're trying to act as the mediators in this dialogue session, right? And so there's a little bit of fiction that I wrote as a way of getting started with this concept. So that was the starting idea is, okay, how do I explain to you a little bit about what this game is through a little bit of fiction. And then I jump in the actual design, right? So this is Mediation over Melee. I talk about it being a game focused on dialogue instead of combat. And then what I'm going to use is something that I learned from Microscope. There are some other games that do this, that have you build a history of the world as part of the game building, right? The world building, the collaborative world building that happens near the beginning of the game, but also as you're going through it. One of the things I learned during my time academically focused on dialogue was that people frequently have differing views of how the world works, like the history of the world in conflict, right? I'm moving my video around in some of the OBS stuff so you can see the second page that I'm talking about here. So people often, when they are in conflict with one another, and this is true of real small scale conflicts like in a home, people have differing views on what caused the conflict, right? When the conflict began, what the conflict is about. And that gets true, incredibly true at a macro sense as well. I feel like I'm making a lot of random noise and doing a lot of weird things today, but I need to open my water that I'm drinking. Okay, so that's going to be one of the main elements of this game, is this a bit of world building, right? Where you, as players, will have to create a series of events that occurred, that everyone can agrees occurred, right? These could be names of battles, these could be territory, these could be specific events. There are always things, right, that happen that people will create, the players will create, and then there will be different narratives. Each of the different groups will have a different narrative about this battle, the territory, the events in question, right? And the dialogue session that you will do as these characters, you will pick a character who represents one of these groups. Either they're leaders at that point, or they are going to be individuals who might have just happened to be caught within the conflict, right? You could very easily just pick a random civilian who happens to be one of the groups in conflict, who wants to be involved in this dialogue. I encourage, I actually wrote that it would be between leaders, but I think my goal, and I'm going to write it here, I'm going to include a note here, or actually, nope, I didn't read the full sentence. So this may be a discussion between leaders looking to forge a peace, or a conversation between commoners on different sides of the conflict, right? You should have whatever characters you choose be somewhat power parity with one another, right? Having one group be the leader of the group and another person be a random peasant, this happens, right? This happens in real life, where people will try and talk to each other with that power disparity, but it's not often helpful for actually causing a reduction or an end of the conflict. It doesn't necessarily lead to that conflict being resolved in a greater way, right? And I want to mention, and I really want this to be a thing, I'm probably going to provide a couple of different genre options in the first version of this, right? I think this framework can be used for games of any genre, right? You can be sci-fi, you can be fantasy, you can be horror probably. You could do a dialogue between all of the great old ones in the Cthulhu mythos, right? I think that would be weird. I think that would be fun. I think you could definitely do a lot with that idea if you wanted to go that route. Regardless, you can choose different genres. I'm going to choose classic fantasy is going to be the initial framework that I'm going to provide, right? That seems to work the best. You can pick different groups within the fantasy milieu. I actually don't have any idea how to pronounce that word correctly. But like, you can pick dragons and humans and elves and kobolds and orcs and anything random, beholders, right? You could pick tons of different things, because fantasy has so many different species and groups that you could pick from. It would give you a lot to work with, right? And then I think I'm going to have the second framework that I'm going to provide for a genre is a sci-fi one, right? Something akin to Twilight Imperium, where there are multiple species that have been at war with one another, and you pick a neutral space to come to and try to work through the conflict. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. The genre itself is just a tool for the storytelling to occur, right? I think this game, as I'm designing it, can be run GM less. And the reason I kind of put a question mark on that is someone has to play the moderator, right? In a formal dialogue, maybe I should explain what dialogue is, right? Dialogue is not debate, right? Dialogue is a form of speaking to one another that is designed to inherently respect the humanity of the people involved. In this game, respecting the personhood of the people involved, hearing their side without fighting about the differences in understanding of a conflict, right? One of the key elements of a dialogue is talking and being heard, right? Often the mediator is facilitating questions being asked by the other participants, right? Or questions being asked so the person speaking is speaking more to the experience of the people who've been on the opposite side of the conflict. But the goal with the dialogue is not to fight, not to win. You're not debating one another. You are listening to one another explain the various ways you've experienced the conflict, or you understand the conflict to exist, with the goal being that there will be some shared empathy and understanding, and hopefully a reduction in the conflict after the fact by going through this dialogue. You'll understand each other more, you'll have more empathy for one another, and I also believe this is the core part of why I think role-playing games are a good tool for dialogue, is you'll have a shared experience, right? It's an interesting subnote in the academic literature about role-playing games that there's sort of an assumed value to people doing a thing together, and that role-playing games facilitate that team effort, that a community building activity. But there's not a whole lot, there's some, but there's not a whole lot of academic literature out there that focuses on why or what, right? What does that do? What is the benefit of that engagement, of that working with each other? I think inherently that it fosters a sense of solidarity and connection and community with one another, which even if you have conflict in the game, you have had that shared experience with each other, right? Often, I think gaming groups get really close, right? You are sharing storytelling. Storytelling is a natural human activity, and when you share those stories together, that builds a sense of oneness, right? There are lots of community storytelling rituals that exist throughout history that I think role-playing games mimic that sort of thing, right? They connect to that same sort of energy that you are leaning into. So it's a fascinating sub element of this, but it for me is a natural assumption that I have to make for the reach out role playing game modality to work, is that doing a thing together, overcoming a challenge together in particular, has a benefit to group cohesion, right? It builds bonds with one another, and that is why a role-playing game is a better vector than just a dialogue, in producing a reduction in post-conflict resurgence of conflict, right? Because I think most people think the goal of dialogue is to make sure that a conflict doesn't spike up worse again in the future, right? Because you're building these bonds with each other. I think a role-playing game provides a couple of different layers. I'm going mostly into the Roarpig stuff, but and I won't do that too much more. Let's talk about the mediator, right? The mediator in Mediation over Melee. This is a person who is a neutral facilitator, right? They're acting to guide the conversation, right? They're acting like the GM, right? So I think this person can be set for the game, right? A mediator is going to be the person who's going to be running the entire little, mini chronicle or one-shot session of this game, but that person doesn't have to be the same person every time. And I think different ways of playing this would allow you to play it effectively, GM-less, in that you would be sharing the mediator role as you're working through it, right? You can have a group where Josh and Jim and Alexei and Marissa are all sitting down to a game, and they are playing different characters, right? Different characters from different groups in conflict, and for different sessions, which can be played within a single game session period with one another, a different person can be the mediator, right? That can be one of the third parties involved in this this dialogue conversation. So I've kind of spent a lot of time with what I've written so far talking about the mediator, because I think the mediator is a key arbiter, right, of this is interesting. So I made a note here at the end, and I don't know if I'm going to keep this, right? The mediator is also the arbiter of any use of armed conflict resolution mechanics like dice rolls or card draws. So I included this because I wanted there to be the possibility that someone throws a punch in these dialogue sessions, right? In this game, someone gets tired of talking. And this is where I'm not confident I'm going to keep this. So I may just cut this and say, no, there aren't going to be, I realize I put a section in here twice. That's why it's a little bit longer. It's not even actually as long as this. Oh, how many words did I lose? About 100. We got 705 words total. Okay. So the mediator, right, is this arbiter of any use of armed conflict resolution. I think that's an interesting idea, right? Like, do I want to create some mechanics in this that deal with someone fighting it out, right? Or do I want to say that you default to a different game's mechanics, right? For example, you could be saying, hey, we're pulling all these characters from a Dungeons and Dragons world, right? Maybe you default, if this happens, to a D&D set of combat roles for this mediation. Or maybe instead you say, maybe I'll create a small set of mechanics that are like, if people fight, this is how you would resolve that situation. Don't really know. I think I'm including this because I want things to have the potential for dynamism. But I know, historically speaking, when people participate in dialogue in the real world, they tend to do so without being... They're there intentionally, right? They want to dialogue. You don't go by accident to a dialogue session. You do so with sincere intent, right? So all that is the background on what I've got so far. I want to probably start working on laying out the background. Laying out the background. Do I want to call it background? Let's see. Laying out the background timeline of the play. That's the next concept that I want to work on here, right? How do you take the ideas? How do you lay down some of those foundations? And I think I'm going to do so with some framework elements as kind of the goal. I'm going to talk about. I'm going to say each player provides one name for an event, one name for a battle, one name for a location. So each player is putting down one name on a thing, saying, hey, this is an event that has occurred, providing no information at this stage. You're just putting the name. And right now, these are just notes, right? This isn't necessarily the way I always write. Sometimes I write in these outline note-taking fashions. Sometimes I sit down and I write straight words, prose on the page. But I think for this presentation of this, I want to talk about it through this. I'm just going to drop notes and then I'm going to work on those notes in the future, right? So you provide no information, just the name. And then when I think each player picks a time length for the conflict in secret. So what I'm doing here is every character's got a different view of the source of the conflict, right? And how long the conflict has been going on. So they should do so privately, right? They should write that down. And if there is a dedicated mediator, they give that information to them. So in this case, if there's a dedicated mediator, they give that little length of conflict time to the mediator, so the mediator has that as a thing in the background of their mind as they are facilitating this eventual dialogue session, right? So we've got, assuming, we have 4 players, right? You'd have 4 events, 4 battles, 4 locations. And then what I'm going to put down, what I think people do, this is all pre-prep, right? This is all pre-active engagement, is that this is even before people pick the characters. There's 4 groups they are playing as. Then each player picks a species, group, or nation, state, whatever, to have involved in the conflict. Group should decide if they are using a pre-existing setting, world, or location. So you could use this, I think, to run a game in any setting, right? So maybe you want to run something in the Birthright setting, or you want to run something in one of the Pathfinder settings, right? This could be a great post-Kingmaker event, right? That you are getting some of the groups in that to engage with one another. This could be any setting you can think of. I'm just probably not My Little Pony, but there's enough conflict in My Little Pony. You could do that. Pick whatever setting. If you want in a pre-existing setting, the group should choose that, right? They should figure that out and then decide, okay, cool, we are using a pre-existing setting, and that will restrict you, but it allows you to then pick the various groups that you could use in the game, right? But we set out, and I'm probably going to rearrange these things as I develop it. Because right now I'm just spitting ideas at the screen, at the page with you to give you a sense of how one can develop a game, right? And I'm doing this from the concept design downward as opposed to mechanics upward or mechanics sideways. I may produce mechanics as I'm working through this, but I want to show you the various ways that you can start and then, get building the pieces of things. So players pick a species group, nation, state, whatever. They pick the groups who are in conflict with one another. You decide if you've got a pre-existing setting world. You've creating these names for the various parts of the conflict. You've picked a time length that each of the players thinks the conflict has been going on. And then you're going to have pick an inciting incident for the conflict. And then this group, but do not discuss it in depth. Okay, so this is the inciting incident is each of the various players is going to, when they pick a character, based on the group they are interested in portraying. I can spell. The good thing about note taking, writing at this stage is it doesn't matter how badly it's misspelled or the grammar you're using, right? You're going to go back and you're going to fix that. You're going to do all the editing in the future. So they're going to pick this different inciting incident because in conflict, most people, like I said before, believe that a conflict starts in a different place, right? Everyone believes that it's going to, that a different thing caused it to occur. So they're going to share that with the group, these different inciting incidences. And this could be, I'm going to give some example. This could be an armed attack by one group against another. This could be a trade dispute. This could be another random example. And then random table. What do I mean? I'm going to include a random table here. I've talked about my love of random tables, but I'm going to include a random table of 1 to 10, maybe 1 to 100 inciting events. Right? So if the players cannot think of a particular inciting event that they want to include, they could instead say, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll on the random table, and then we're going to pick that inciting event as the one that we're going to use. Once they've picked the inciting events, and there should be one of these per player, assuming you've got a group of 3 to 6 players, you've got a bunch of different inciting events, right? And they're all true. Right? These are all events that have occurred. They may not they should not, right? They should not all agree on those events, right? Or how those events are going to have played out. But those events are all true, right? Any inciting event is an event that has occurred. And people need to accept that as the reality of the world, the setting that you're creating. Okay. So we've got these inciting events. I think what I'm also going to do is I'm going to have a random table for species and groups. Going to have a random table for length of conflict, right? Okay, so that's a good way of framing, building this, is including some of these random tables to help players come up with different things. I think I'm going to have separate random tables for names of the battle, location, and event. These will just be within genre, right? The first genre I'm picking is going to be a fantasy setting, so I'm going to focus on building those first. Cool. That gives me a lot to work with, right? For a framework for how to help people lay out the background, right? I'm going to describe, this is the way you can lay out the background. This is how you can do it. Everyone just kind of generating, creating, and providing their own ideas. And then if you need to, here's a set of random tables to help you build those together if you're stuck, right? If you're not able to create a different thing. And then we're going to get into character creation. Pick a member of one species involved in the conflict. No one can pick the same group. Species / group, right? It's totally acceptable, of course, to pick that two groups of elves are in conflict, two groups of humans, two groups of etc., right? You could go on and on and on, but you can't pick the same group. Like, everyone has to represent a separate group in the game. And you can, of course, use the random table above to choose the different groups and nations, the different species that are involved, and then each player is going to make sure they pick one of those groups. And, do that in any way that makes sense. Then, as a group, decide what power level your character is from, right? Are they leaders? Are they commoners? Hopefully you can see that when it moves to the second page here. Or are they middle managers, war leaders? Right? Where are they in the power scale is going to be really important. And I don't think this can be, I'm going to provide a random table. Options, leaders, seconds in command, right? Commoners, etc. Clergy members are a good one. Ooh, good one to have involved is clergy, right? Frequently, clergy are both conflict instigators and conflict reducers, right? And historically speaking, in human cultures, clergy are often either encouraging a conflict to deepen, or they are working really hard to reduce the conflict, right? Those are, stereotypically speaking, the types of influences that clergy have in a conflict in this type that we're talking about here. Cool. So we've got character creation, right? You've got pick the group, pick the power level, then pick a personality type. Conflict expander, conflict reducer, conflict indifferent. This is an important part, right? The character that you're creating should have an opinion on if they wish the conflict to continue. Do they want the conflict to get worse? Or are they actively trying to reduce the conflict long term, right? Generally speaking, if people are coming to a dialogue, they're frequently conflict reducers, but it depends on the type of dialogue that you are simulating. If it's some form of ceasefire discussion or peace talks, right? There are oftentimes in conflicts people who wish the conflict to continue, right? And when you are creating the character for this game, you're going to want to decide what opinion they have about the conflict, right? Do they want it to get worse, expand, get stronger, or are they looking for the conflict to reduce and peter out and be, no longer a problem, right? Or do they just not really care about the conflict? If you're playing a commoner, you may not care one way or another about the greater conflict, even if it's impacted you. You may just be like, it's a thing that people are going to do. I'm not too stressed about it, but you've come to this thing for a reason. I think that's the next character element that you have to have. Why are you here at the dialogue? Yeah, there can be a bunch of different reasons, right? You have interest in furthering or reducing conflict. Food. Often dialogue sessions have food involved, right? It is a great instigator to get people who might not otherwise participate to participate, is to provide food to them. You might have monetary interests in the conflict. Expand this into more, right? Going to provide more options there for why you're at the dialogue, right? And then, of course, give space for people to create their own ideas. Okay. I'm at the 40-ish minute mark. That was about how long I wanted to run through some of this design today. I'm going to save this onto my computer now that I've started working on it. Called Mediation over Melee right now. I'm going to come back to this in the next one of these live streams. I'm going to keep developing this out. I might work on this in the meantime. But if you have any questions, ideas, things you want to throw at the concept, please let me know. Happy to talk about this with people. If this isn't interesting, if you're like, why are you doing this, Josh? Please let me know that too. And I'm going to keep doing different things with these live streams. And I hope you have a wonderful day and things go well for you. Forgot to mention at the beginning, please like and subscribe and do all those things because I need all the support that I can get. And I appreciate everything you're doing. So have a wonderful day.